Let's start with the mildly disturbing experiments and slowly work our way towards the most nightmare-inducing ones on the list. Number 6. The Chinese tongue diagnosis experiments. During the Han Dynasty around 200 BCE, imperial physicians developed tongue diagnosis into a precise science. But they didn't start with observation. They started with manipulation. Medical texts from Ma Wangdui describe experiments where physicians would give patients known poisons in controlled doses, then document exactly how the tongue changed color, texture, and coating over time. They tested dozens of toxins, carefully recording the progression from first symptoms to death, mapping each stage to specific tongue appearances. The goal was to create a diagnostic reference guide, and they did. But it required poisoning hundreds of test subjects, usually criminals or prisoners, with measured amounts of arsenic, mercury, hemlock, and worse. Each poison created a distinct tongue pattern, and by the end, Chinese physicians could diagnose the specific toxin and how long until death just by looking in your mouth. The Mawangdui texts include illustrations showing 47 different tongue states, each one learned by watching someone die from a specific cause. That's not folk medicine. That's empirical toxicology built on human test subjects who had no idea they were teaching future doctors. Number 5. The Mayan dental experiments. The Maya didn't just drill decorative holes in teeth for jade inlays. They used teeth as test sites for studying pain tolerance and infection. Skeletons from sites like Palenque show evidence of deliberate dental procedures done without any infection afterward, which means they figured out sterilization somehow. But other skeletons show infections that were clearly intentional. They would drill into a healthy tooth, introduce foreign material, wait to see if infection developed, then drill another tooth on the same person and try a different material. Some skulls have 6 or 7 experimental drill holes with different outcomes. They were testing what caused infections and what prevented them by using people's mouths as laboratories. We know it was experimental because the patterns are too systematic to be cosmetic. Bottom jaw, left side, 3 holes, 3 infections. Bottom jaw, right side, 3 holes, 0 infections. Same person, different technique. The Maya figured out that obsidian tools caused fewer infections than copper ones, that certain plant resins prevented bacterial growth, and that drilling on a full moon somehow led to worse outcomes. They learned all this by just trying stuff on people who couldn't say no. Hands down, they were better dentists than most medieval Europeans, but only because they'd practiced on hundreds of unwilling subjects first. Number 4, the Greek elevator torture experiment. Hippocrates, the father of medicine, the guy whose oath doctors still swear today, described a procedure he called succussion. You take a patient with a spinal injury, tie them to a ladder, hang the ladder between 2 posts, and then violently shake it up and down or drop it repeatedly. The goal was to see if jarring the spine back into place would cure paralysis. Hippocratic texts describe trying this on multiple patients with different types of spine damage, documenting which injuries responded and which ones resulted in the patient dying from the procedure. Modern analysis suggests the success rate was roughly 5%, meaning 19 out of 20 patients either stayed paralyzed or died from internal bleeding. But that 5% was enough to keep the practice going for generations. Greek physicians would advertise their succussion skills, and wealthy families would pay to have their paralyzed relatives strapped to the torture ladder on the off chance it might work. The texts specify trying different drop heights, different shaking rhythms, different suspension angles. That's experimental methodology. Brutal, terrible experimental methodology, but still systematic testing with documented results. And because Hippocrates wrote it down, doctors kept doing it for over 1,000 years. Number 3, the Aztec heart extraction studies. Everyone knows the Aztecs did human sacrifice. What most people don't know is that their priests were conducting cardiac research at the same time. Aztec medical texts describe how priests would time the sacrifice procedure, competing to see who could extract a beating heart fastest. But they weren't just racing for ritual reasons, they were studying cardiac function. By extracting hearts at different speeds, at different angles, with different incision patterns, they learned exactly how the heart connected to major vessels, how long it would beat outside the body under various conditions, and what happened if you removed it versus just exposing it. Spanish conquistador accounts describe seeing Aztec physicians who could diagnose heart problems by pressing on the chest in specific patterns, knowledge that only makes sense if you've seen dozens of hearts in action. Modern analysis of Aztec surgical tools shows they had bronze implements shaped specifically for rib spreading and vessel cutting, designed with an efficiency that only comes from extensive practice. They turned religious ritual into an anatomy lab and documented everything. By the time the Spanish arrived, Aztec priests understood cardiac anatomy better than most European doctors because they'd performed what we'd now call open heart observation on thousands of living subjects, Exactly the wrong way to learn medicine, but the resulting knowledge was disturbingly accurate. Number 2. The Persian sleep deprivation experiments. Al-Razi, a Persian polymath around 900 CE, documented systematic sleep deprivation tests on hospital patients in Baghdad. He wanted to understand the medical effects of staying awake, so he had attendants keep patients awake for measured periods, 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, documenting the mental and physical breakdown at each stage. The patients weren't volunteers. They were the poor and imprisoned who received free medical care at the hospital in exchange for, well, being research subjects. Al-Razi's medical text described the progression. Hallucinations started around 72 hours, violent outbursts around 96 hours, complete cognitive collapse around 120 hours. Some patients never recovered normal sleep patterns afterward. Some developed permanent psychological damage. But Al-Razi got his data, and his writings on sleep became foundational to Islamic and later European medicine. The really disturbing part? His notes include dosing some sleep-deprived patients with various drugs to see if he could counteract the effects. Opium made it worse. Certain herbs helped slightly. Coffee, newly discovered, was a game changer. He learned all this by destroying people's minds and then trying to fix them with untested substances. And because his results were so well documented and repeatable, other physicians across the Islamic world replicated his experiments for the next 2 centuries. Number 1. The trepanation survival experiments. This is it, the most disturbing because it was the most widespread and lasted the longest. Trepanation, drilling or scraping a hole through the skull, happened in nearly every ancient culture from Peru to China to Europe. But here's what makes it experimental. They kept doing it over and over with different techniques, different hole sizes, different locations on the skull, documenting survival rates that got better over time. Skulls from 3000 BCE show crude holes with zero bone regrowth, meaning the patient died during or right after the procedure. Skulls from 1000 BCE show partial regrowth, meaning survival for weeks or months. Skulls from 500 CE show complete regrowth, meaning the patient lived years afterward. That's a 2,500-year experiment spanning continents with thousands of test subjects all trying to answer one question. How do you cut into someone's brain without killing them? The success rate went from maybe 10% to over 80% by the end. We have skulls showing 2, 3, even 7 separate trepanation holes done over a person's lifetime, proving not only did they survive, they came back for more. These ancient surgeons had no idea what the brain did. No anesthesia, no antiseptics, no antibiotics. They just kept trying slightly different methods on anyone who complained of headaches, seizures, or mental problems. And somehow, impossibly, they figured it out. Different cultures arrived at nearly identical optimal hole sizes and locations independently because the human skull only forgives so many mistakes before you die. This wasn't medicine, this was trial and error at its most literal and most lethal. But by the Roman era, trepanation was so refined that survival rates matched some surgeries in the 1800s. Dead. The ancient world didn't have ethics committees, consent forms, or any concept of human rights as we understand them. So when doctors wanted to learn something, they just tried it on whoever was available and wrote down what happened. The Assyrians turned torture into data collection. The Aztecs turned ritual into anatomy lessons. The Greeks, Romans, Persians, Chinese, Maya, Egyptians, and Incas all ran systematic experiments on living humans because the alternative was not knowing, and not knowing meant everyone died instead of just the test subjects. The knowledge they gained wasn't worth the suffering they caused, but that knowledge still forms the foundation of modern medicine, which means we're all benefiting from experiments that would land someone in prison today. The real horror isn't that these experiments happened, it's that they worked, the data was good, the results were repeatable. The techniques improved over generations because they were actually learning real things about human biology by doing terrible things to real humans. We like to think science and ethics go together, but for most of human history, they absolutely didn't. So yeah, disturbing ancient experiments you've never heard of. Now you've heard of them. And honestly, you're probably going to think about that trepanation thing next time you have a headache. If you want to see what happened when ancient civilizations tried to cure diseases instead of just cutting people open, that's a whole different nightmare worth exploring.